Если ты говоришь, мне слышно?
Да, слышно.
Да, спасибо.
Да.
Больше не буду.
Good afternoon, dear friends. So we are waiting for other participants and for other guests, I think, for 5 minutes, and then we start.
That's something else.
Здравствуйте.
Здравствуйте, Лариса.
Здравствуйте. Здравствуйте.
Здравствуйте.
Здравствуйте всем. Как вы?
Здравствуйте, Лариса Николаевна.
Здравствуйте.
Здравствуйте.
Очень рада всех вас видеть. Здравствуйте.
Good evening all from the Icrc. Happy to join.
Good evening. Добрый день. Hi to everyone.
Oh, Ivan Dmitrovich. Okay, Ivan Dmitrovich is our moderator today, so I think we can start. So, good afternoon, dear friends, dear colleagues, dear guests and experts, and I'm very glad to see you here, to see you today on our event. And so I would like to tell you that we have audience not only here in Zoom, but also in YouTube. And my name is Alexey Demidov. I'm the president of the African Club of GIMO. GIMO is Moscow State University of International Relations. And so I study Amharic and the history, policy, and economy of Ethiopia. And actually, we have two presidents in our club. The first, me, and the second is Valery. Valery is also present today, and he is responsible for the technical side of our meeting. And Valera, like me, studies Amharic and Ethiopia. And so our event is entitled The Conflict in Ethiopia, Facts and Opinions. And as you know, the conflict in this country has been going on for over a year. And however, there is the lack of information. The information that we have is very contradictory. So many people that are interested in the Ethiopian developments are confused and don't understand what is really happening in Ethiopia. And so initially, Valera came up with the idea to conduct an event, to conduct a meeting about the conflict in Ethiopia. And I developed this concept, so I thought that it will be very interesting to take a look at the conflict from the perspective of various experts. And so we invited different people from different countries, and what's especially important, I think, with different views. And I think that it will be very useful for the audience as well as for the experts to find out what the colleagues think about the topic that we are all interested in. And I hope that at the end, the audience will be able to form their opinion based on the facts and interpretations they have heard. And now, let me introduce the moderator of our today's meeting, Associate Professor Ivan Dmitrievich Loshkarev. He's the old friend of the African Club, and he helped us to conduct many other events. And like me and like Valera, Ivan Dmitrievich studied Amharic at our university and is very interested in Ethiopia. So you're welcome.
Thank you, Alexei, for your kind remarks. First of all, let me say how grateful I am to the African Club for that discussion that we have today. I think that with that generation of African researchers who study Africa, we will move forward with practical solutions with regards to Russian policy in Africa. So I think we all are very grateful to our African Club, and that's the first I want to say. The second thing I want to say is that I want to express the opinion of the leadership of the Institute of International Studies in our university, that I was talking to Professor Suchkov several days ago, and he said that the African studies in our university are growing and gain momentum at the point, and we are in the middle of negotiations about an ambitious program on African studies in our university. So it's very important for us to have discussions like this. And the major issue for our today's discussion is the conflict in Ethiopia, and the problem that we all in Russia see is very simple. For decades, Ethiopia was a relatively stable country, and today something has changed, and we are in search of solutions, how we should address that issue, or we should not react at all. And our discussion today will probably help us to understand how to move forward with the situation from the Russian standpoint. But I also want to say that in order to do our discussion more productive, we brought together people with different perspectives and with different opinions about what is going on. So I hope that we will have a respectful and meaningful conversation today. And I'm not going to talk a lot anymore. So as I was said, we have Professor Mizentsev, Stanislav Vasilievich Mizentsev from the Institute of African Studies of Russian Academy of Science, who wants to speak first. Before we go into Professor Mizentsev, I also want to say something about the rules of our today's discussion. We agreed with Alexei that for remarks of each our participant, we have 10 minutes, and 7 minutes we have for the debate, for questions and follow-ups in order to grasp major ideas of our today's participants. So 10 minutes for major remarks and 7 minutes for questions, follow-ups, etc. And I hope I said all I need to say, so it's time for Professor Mizentsev. Stanislav Vasilievich, are you here?
I think that
So
Stanislav Vasilievich, I think he's not present yet because he's now in Somalia and he can have some problems with the internet. And I hope that he joins us in
later.
I think in 20 minutes, I think, yes.
Okay, so we are going to the next. Our participant, Lorenzo Rydale from International Red Cross, Moscow Regional Delegation. And the floor is yours, Mr. Lorenzo.
Yes, thank you very much, Ivan Dmitrovich, and thank you very much again, Alexei and Valery, for organizing this session. I'm very pleased to join this discussion organized by the African Club. We met last year in Gimo, some of your colleagues during a presentation of our organization and our work. But today we want to zoom in on Ethiopia, a context that was in the highlights of our operations. I don't know if you can see my screen.
We see it.
You see it. So voila. Today, in a way, I want just to start by just brief introduction, few words on Icrc as a neutral, independent, and impartial organization involved in more than 80 countries in the world, fulfilling a pure humanitarian mission to protect and assist the victims of armed conflict. So the mandate is really given by the state.
Mr. Lorenzo, I'm sorry, dear participants, turn off your mics, those who are not speaking.
Yeah, there is some activity in the room. Again, Icrc being present in all the contexts where armed conflict situations are present. Also, Ethiopia is one of them. We are in Ethiopia not since the last year, but since 1977, since the conflict between Ethiopia and Somalia. And today we are present in the country in several areas. So you can see in the north, so Tigray, with operations also in Afar and Amhara, with permanent presence and offices in Mekele, Shire, and Gonder, but also in the central part. Of course, we have our main office in Addis Ababa, but we cover also the Somali area and Oromia. In general, in the country, I will not extend my presentation because we want to focus today on the north, but we work also to visit people arrested in relation with the conflict. We have activities for people with disabilities, and also we help reconnecting people separated throughout the country. Now, if we want to zoom in into the situation in the north, probably the lights shed by our experts will help us put in a broader context, because my intervention is more related to the humanitarian consequences rather than really the causes or the dynamic of the conflict that we leave to the specialists. What we observe from the ground is that as the intensification of the conflict is taking place after summer, so we are having a high number, hundreds of thousands of people displaced. in various regions of the north and who are living in very dire conditions. We are in particular very much worried about the needs of those displaced people, in particular in Amhara and Tigray. We observe children separated by their families from their parents, and families coping with various very precarious conditions and also exposed to sexual violence. They lack access to basic needs such as water and medical services. Displaced, of course, adding additional pressure on hosting communities. Again, a lack of water, food, power, and their resilience is really stretched to the limits. There is a key question that often is related to the debate on Ethiopia, is related to the food, the situation of food security. And it's true that in Tigray we are very much worried by the fact that we see that, I mean, we hear reports about people eating only one meal per day, and the quality of the food is decreasing. So it's in a way we are making calls to both parties, I mean, to all the parties to the conflict, to really facilitate the access of the humanitarian response to those areas. Another, let's say, important aspect that is part of the mandate to protect and assist of the Icrc in terms of issues and problems. Also, we see an increased pressure on the personal safety of medical staff, and then while they are performing their mission, so while treating the casualties or trying to help, we see that the medical staff are threatened in many circumstances, which has of course the result of impacting basically the quality of the service of an essential service such as the medical one. Now going to the response of the Icrc, you have in this slide a different areas. So Icrc try to respond to all across the board, being one of the very, very few, if not the only one, organization on the ground in Tigray. We have really to diversify our response, covering medical response, but also food security and non-food, we call it economic security when we distribute non-food items. But also we help facilitating access to water. We visit people arrested in relation with the conflict and people separated by the hostilities. Again, this is a map that shows a bit our presence throughout the Ethiopia, but you can see also more detailed our activities in the first semester. But I can briefly giving you an update. So we have to adapt our response to the rapidly shifting of the evolving of the security situation with the advance of the armed groups, the strategic pullback. So we are adapting, and again the neutrality of the Icrc means that we have had access to all the areas, and giving basically substance to our, we call it, all Ethiopia approach. So it's important also to keep in mind that we are not only responding to the needs of the people in Tigray, but also in Amhara and Afar. This is quite important. That's to keep in mind that really Icrc is trying to help the people in all those regions. And so yes, also we in Amhara. Last week, we have been distributing food to vulnerable displaced people in Salya Semeyet for 6,000 people, and other essential household items such as mattress, kitchen set, solar lamps, and also in people in Meket. We work together with the Ethiopian Red Cross Society. We are part of the same movement of international movement of Red Cross and Red Crescent Society. It's very important to stress the fact that there is a huge network of volunteers from Ethiopian Red Cross Society helping in distributing the assistance, but also to look for family members that went that basically went separated. So we try to trace the people who are reported either missing or separated, and through phone calls or exchange of news with the famous Red Cross messages that are family news put on paper, we exchange those information across northern Ethiopia. Then just to go towards the conclusion of my first presentation, and then I'm happy to answer to your questions. I want just to highlight the key challenges of our response. So there are different types of challenges. One is basically, well, the security situation. So our access, the delivery of humanitarian assistance has been hampered by the fightings and the access constraints. So we see that there is a certain degree of polarization that is also sometimes takes the shape of let's say misinformation. So it's like many other conflict situation, accessing the right information that doesn't sort of manipulate the work also of the humanitarian sector is very, very important. So we hope, and we are working also diplomatically with the visit, for instance, of our president Peter Maurer, that was in Addis Ababa and also went to the field. We try really to carve an unhindered humanitarian access, despite, of course, the very fluid security situation. I think this is my. I think I remain in the first 10 minutes of the presentation. I'm happy to take your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Do we have questions for our first speaker? Maybe I have a question, a small one, but still. You mentioned that the Red Cross in Ethiopia is helped by a network of volunteers who provide some services to local communities in need. So do those networks face some hindrances from both parties of conflict, or both parties of conflict, or at least one, respects their work and does not create some hindrances to their volunteering actions? What's your major assessment?
Overall, I would say it's thanks to the network of the volunteers that our acceptance has improved. So when we talk about this network of volunteers, the great advantage is that we talk about volunteers who are of the community. They come from the community we sort of serve, and so in a way it's a very diversified landscape of volunteers. You have volunteers who are based in Tigray. You have volunteers who are based in Amhara and in Afar, and so it's because they are part of the same family, and so we share the same fundamental principles, that in a way they can also help an international committee who has a specific mandate to work in those areas. So I would say it's definitely an asset we have. Then, of course, when it comes to the security situation, so when fighting occurs, they are of course just as exposed as we are to the volatility of the security situation. But in terms of acceptance, it's a great asset.
Thank you. We also have a question from Alexei, and he asks, does the task of the Red Cross include the dissemination of objective information about the conflict, first of all, about the humanitarian situation, and where can we find such information? So basically, Alexei asks about what the Red Cross does in terms of information. Does it provide some information, and especially about humanitarian crisis or situation that Ethiopia has now?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Alexei, for this question. In a way, what, let's say, the advocacy role, in a way, there is a part of public communication that Icrc does. And then also, again, I thank the African Club because this is a clear example. So we draw publicly the attention on the humanitarian consequences of the conflict, the main humanitarian issues and trends of violations of international humanitarian law. You know that the Icrc has the mandate also to not only to protect and assist the victims of the conflict, but also to promote the international humanitarian law, the law of armed conflict. So while Icrc cannot comment on the military advances of the parties or the rightfulness of who started the conflict, but rather our messages are more related to the respect of IHL. And when I mentioned, for instance, before the fact that we are worried about the fact that the medical personnel might face at times threats, this is a clear sort of reminder that IHL rules basically oblige parties to the conflict to respect the medical mission. When we say that Icrc asks for uninterrupted access, is also because we have the mandate to access in a secure way those areas. So while we don't want to enter in any political discussion or disclose the content of our confidential and bilateral reports that we share only with the responsible authorities, we draw the attention on the humanitarian consequences. Because indeed, in parallel, there is a bilateral dialogue. We engage the government of Ethiopia, but also Tplf and other armed groups that joined the fightings. And this dialogue is based on the trust of the fact that Icrc will not disclose basically his observation publicly. And also it's based on this trust that we can access Tigray. It's based on this trust that we can access the members of the people, basically the people arrested in relations to the conflict. And if we see that something can be improved in the treatment of these detainees, we're gonna share our reports only with the authority in charge of the detention place, for instance. I hope it's clear.
Yes.
The nature of our work.
So
Thank you.
help as much as you can, but politically neutrally help. Okay, and we have a question probably from Mikhail Gorsky, if I'm not mistaken. You may ask your question if you want.
Okay, good. Do you hear me, guys?
Yes, we hear you.
Good. Excellent. Question is pretty simple. For the Red Cross, like how you evaluate your risk tolerance, going to the going for the battlefront? Is that what your volunteers are doing? How you evaluate, because it's kind of violent in the conflict area. So that's the first question about your risk tolerance, what you're doing. And the second question is about your background checks. You work with you provide resources to volunteers in the conflict area. How you don't know that they are not rebels, for example, or vice versa, maybe. So two questions, like risk tolerance and background checks. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. They are very good questions. In general, Icrc is not a zero risk organization. So there is basically a sort of ratio whereby we accept a certain level of risk if justified by sort of the imperative of the humanitarian specific mission. Concrete terms, we have very sort of specific procedure. We have to go through a very thorough risk analysis that is constantly adjourned, and we have, for instance, to adapt our movements. Very often, where we are more exposed is when we move. So, for instance, most of our movements are taking place by plane. And then, of course, we don't go where active fighting are taking place. We are responders, and so even if we are first responders, we want to take. We have also a due diligence vis-a-vis our staff and the volunteers who accompany us to make it sure that the security situation allows a sort of a safe intervention. There is no gain in incurring in a security incident, because then we would stop operations. Also, what is very important, I was talking about the trust that the ICRC is working for. It's very important. So ICRC basically doesn't take the risk to work in areas where our acceptance is not confirmed. If we have the impression that people do not accept us, and so we can be directly targeted, we generally don't go. So what I said in terms of we work in very volatile areas, so there is often a risk that we cannot really avoid, which is basically being in the wrong place at the wrong time, no matter all the security checks we do. But luckily, for instance, well, the number of security incidents remain relatively low. Now, when it comes to the background checks for the volunteers, it's not like a job interview. It's not that we hire the volunteers of the Ethiopian Red Cross. It's the responsibility of the national society to basically promote well enough and the movement, the values of the movement, the fundamental principle of the movement. But then there is a fundamental question, I think that Michael, maybe you can touch upon is the fact is that even if we say the fundamental principle of the movement include neutrality, which means we don't take sides, of course it's much easier for someone like me with a Swiss passport going to Ethiopia to see, well, vis-a-vis this conflict, I'm neutral. Even if in a way we don't nobody asked me to be born neutral vis-a-vis. I have also my own opinion. What we ask the volunteers on the ground is that they really do their utmost, and then honestly, I have I think in the field more than 10 years of experience in Afghanistan, Congo, Myanmar, working with the volunteers of the national societies directly affected by the conflict. It's really impressive how can they make the difference between their personal opinion and their role as volunteers of the movement. Also because honestly, the more you work in the field, the more you're exposed to violence, the more you realize that violations take place from both sides. Then, of course, there are serious violations of international humanitarian law when, for instance, our emblem is misused, for instance, to launch attack against adversaries. So these are very serious breach of international humanitarian law when, for instance, our emblems, our symbols are used to commit offensive actions in wartime. But this, I would say, it's an all another chapter.
Thank you for your answer. That was very detailed answer. So we have to move forward actually, because we have a special person from Somalia who is now in Somalia, and we are going to listen to Stanislav Vasilievich Mizentsev, a senior research fellow from Institute for African Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Stanislav Vasilievich, are you here? Are you with us?
Good. Yes, I am. It's my big pleasure to be with you this evening. A few corrections. I'm in Djibouti. I just arrived here an hour ago. From here, I'm planning to go to Somali, northern part of Somalia, Somaliland. Let me now maybe switch off my camera because of the some problem with the Wi-Fi internet here, and I will be just talking, but you've seen my face, and I'm really in Djibouti. And on this, I'm thank you very much that you gave me this opportunity to be involved in this discussion. And I will try to be as short as possible because in some 10 minutes, 15 maximum, I have to leave this place to go to the reception here in Djibouti. So yeah, now I hope that you still hear me.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Good. Okay. So because I'm happen to be to join your conference organized by the African Club for this very important discussion about around in Ethiopia, what is going on. And I'm happen to be joining you from Djibouti, going to Somaliland, as I already mentioned. Let me start from the regional impact of the situation in Ethiopia, which is now we feel here in Djibouti, in Somalia, and far beyond the borders of Ethiopia down to Kenya, Tanzania, and all the region is affected by the situation, by destabilization of the situation in Ethiopia. And the regional impact of destabilization of Ethiopia is very dangerous and very unpredictable. And all governments around Ethiopia, like Djiboutian government, Somaliland authorities, the bordering countries like the Sudan, South Sudan mostly, and the Kenya and Tanzania, they're all now watching very carefully the situation in Ethiopia because, like as we say, Djibouti, it's a only road to connect the world trade economically with Ethiopia, and now having some combat activities in the north part of Ethiopia, it's affected the economy of Djibouti as well. So everybody is here and around Ethiopia is very much concerned about the situation in Ethiopia. Unfortunately, I know Ethiopia quite well. I've been there almost half of my life. First time I came to Ethiopia in 1982. Then I've been there for 16 years, and now I'm going all the time back. And I can tell you that within 10 minutes, within 20 minutes, within an hour, it will be mostly impossible to discuss and to understand, at least to touch all the reasons of what is going today in Ethiopia historically and currently, because this is so complicated. It's so complicated. So let me just try to point it out few, according to it's my personal opinion and my personal analysis, a few main reasons for this situation, which is now we are seeing in Addis Ababa, in Tigray, in all around the country of Ethiopia. It's very strange to say, but this is the reason for this. I can say it's a winds of change, winds of positive changes in this country brought all this destabilization, chaos, and even the military activities. Why? Because the difficulties or the features and the specific specific characteristics of the Ethiopia as a country, and everybody knows this. It's a multinational, more than 60 nations, and are in one country. It's probably the most complicated national question in this country in comparison with all other African countries. And if we go back to the history of Ethiopia, before 1977, last century, the stability and the integrity and the unity of Ethiopian empire was built by the belief and trust mostly of the majority of the population of the country on the empire, who they were seeing him like a god and they were respecting him. And even though the sometimes Eritrea and the northern part of Ethiopia, sometimes Haile Selassie, the first empire of Ethiopia, he was using the military force to stabilize, to depress, and to keep this northern part of Ethiopia under his control. 1977 empire was dismissed by the regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam, and it was another 2 decades of the dictatorship of the current government, of the regime of the Mengistu, and the integrity and the unity during that time was just strictly because of the military power, military control, military suppression of the most part of biggest part of the population, and especially again the northern part of Ethiopia. Now what has happened after 1991, the bipolar system collapsed. The Soviet Union, who was mostly ideologically, financially, and politically supported Mengistu, collapsed, and the 2 poles in the politics, the system changed, and the Mengistu regime fall down. And it was the very intrigue and very the situation brought Meles Zenawi, the Tigranians, minority of 7% of the general population. Just the situation brought them to power, and because the idea of the Tigray National Liberation Front of Tigray, Tplf, Tigray People Liberation Front, was just to get independence from Tigray. And they were together with the Eritrean National Front of Liberation of Eritrea. They wanted just to be independent from Ethiopia after all decades and hundreds of years of suppression. But the political situation created like that, the Tigranians took the Addis Ababa and took the power, and they remain in this power for more than 20 years now, up to the death of the leader of the Tigray regime, of the great politician, I should say, Meles Zenawi, who unfortunately passed away in August 2012. And the current situation started not from Abiy Ahmed, not from the current government. The current destabilization, the current crisis started exactly in 2012. Because now the strong leadership disappeared from the scene, and his successor, deputy prime minister, who was, according to the constitution, came to power without election, Haile Mariam Desalegn, he was unfortunately not very strong enough, not very ready enough to take the rule of the great nation, of the great country. And this, it's put at a very bad input. And as soon as, all what we are calling now politics, military conflict, I strongly believe, and if I would have more time, I would try to convince you all here present that all what we are calling now political problem of Ethiopia, or this political destabilization or whatever military destabilization, it was started from simple economical problem when the weak leader of the country started to give more economic freedom and more independence from external economic players. I don't want to mention the countries because we are in MGIMO and the political club and African club. You will get your conclusion by yourself. But some countries, foreign countries in Ethiopia, they started to get more land in Oromia. You know that Addis Ababa, the capital of the Ethiopia, it's a part of Oromia region, the biggest region, the biggest population. And you know, the land in Africa, not only in Ethiopia, everywhere, in Uganda, in Tanzania, everywhere where you go, you see the land, it's more important than life for the Africans. And when someone comes and try to grab your land, for whatever reason, for industrial parks, for industrialization, whatever you are saying behind, the owners of the land, the simple people, they start resistance, the very aggressive resistance to protect their own land. And this problem started during the Stalin time from economic, how to say, this organization of the system, which was ruled by the strong government, by the strong leader, and was under strong military control. And from that time, the situation created this, you know, the police force came to move these people from Oromia, and the Oromians started to protect themselves. Some civilians were killed. Exactly at this moment, some external, internal, whatever forces interfere. They used this to politicize the economical crisis, trying to move it to the political side. And you know what? Finally, the government of the previous prime minister was not able to control, and they just resigned and left the country in the stage like to be disordered, ruined, or even nationally disorganized. In this situation, no one wanted to take the power in this country. And Ahmed Abiy, he was the one, being the Oromo, being the ex-military guy, being the strong enough nationalist and strong enough citizen, his feeling that he would be able to stabilize. And he came to power in the situation of real war already started in the country. And when he came to power, the first what he wanted to do, he wanted, why I said winds of change for democracy. Ethiopia never been the democratic, whatever. It was all the time empire. It was the fascist Mengistu regime. It was the strong Tigranian suppression with the military. And he started his social political experiment, which was very dangerous. He started to open up. He released all political prisoners. You know what they did after he released them? They 3 times they attempted to kill him, because these people, after the current government released them from the prison, they came to assassinate him. He tried to give more freedom for Oromia, for Tigranians, for all big parts of Ethiopia, but he faced the very big challenge. You know that the traditional ruling political elite of Ethiopia, they were not ready for this. And they said, oh, what are you doing? You are destroying our bases. We cannot do this as a populism. This what they start criticizing him and his government. And on the other side, the young generation, the young population who was already felt this, wind of change, they started to demand from him more and more freedom and more independence. He was in between. And let me tell you, it was not easy to not to, to just get out from the scene. He created the new party. He continuously trying to be more democratic, even though country was not ready for that. Finally, he even come to and sign an agreement with the Eritrea, and the majority of the population in Ethiopia, they didn't accept this because the Eritrea was like an enemy not for the Tigranians only, but for the people who, and even Oromians and Amaras who lost his life during the last Eritrean-Ethiopian war. It was not a war against Eritrea, Tigray. It was a war between nation of Ethiopia and Eritrea. So it was also not popular. Then the COVID came, then he postponed the election and all this, and all these winds of change for the democracy. He started the transitional government. We have to understand, we have to be patient. We have to understand that the winds of change in 1960, which bring the freedom for all Africa, took 20 years of misgovernment, of abortos, of all these very regimes which were very far from idea of national independence. And what Abiy Ahmed and his government started today in Ethiopia is the same process, trying to change the empire, which was based on the military, to the open democratic society. And of course, the Tigranians, they lost the whole economic, for 24 years, the strong leader, Meles Zenawi, he created the economic system when the whole leadership in economy belong only for Tigranians. And I remind you, it's only 7% of this big population. And the people was not happy with this, and this was, even Meles himself, he was understanding this at his last years of his ruling. He was trying to reduce the Tigranians' dominance even in the party, but unfortunately he passed away without his good successor. Now, the question is what to do now. If someone asks me what to do now, internally, of course, both sides has to come and try to find a way for negotiation, for political dialogues, because otherwise the continuation of the military attempt to resume the control under Tigray will get the Oromo, Afars, all this. It's the national question still is not solved in this country, and the situation can get out of the control in Ethiopia. I'm saying this, touching the wood. We cannot afford this. If the Ethiopia will be Somalized like Somalia, which in 1991 lost became the failed state, it creates the horn will be completely destroyed, and it affects all the region. So we have internally, it has to be kind of dialogue between all parties involved. Externally, please stop all this external influence into the Ethiopia. Everybody now trying to put the oil into the fire because there are too many people wants to use this. Too many foreign players are coming now. They must stop interference, because otherwise it will, even for Egypt, it will be a big disaster if Ethiopia comes to national disorganized on this, like as Somalia in 1991. So if the Russian position now is to stop the military activities, to try to negotiate, and between all parties involved, of course, current government will not accept to talk with Tzadkan Gebretinsae or some military leaders whom they treat like they did a coup d'etat, the attempt to coup d'etat. But there are some other not very radical circles in Tigray and Afars. They have to be brought, even maybe with the help with the external powers brought to the table of negotiations. And once again, the most important, stop influence from outside. Leave ICRC, leave other international humanitarian organizations to help to stop the suffering of the population, but stop political, ideological, and even propaganda. Stop use the international propaganda to continuously to destroy Ethiopia, because this and I'm stop my very emotional speech on this, because it's really hurts me a lot, because I love this country. I want it to be stable and democratic. Let's stop influence. Let's try them to find a way for negotiations. I thank you very much. And unfortunately, I know that maybe I put a lot of questions which you want to argue, but I'm leaving the floor and I'm leaving the conference, and I'm ready maybe to argue or to discuss this issue later on. And thank you very much for the organizers.
Thank you, Stanislav.
Thank you very much.
Vasilievich.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we have no discussion after that wonderful speech, but we all share that opinion that Ethiopia should be stable. At least that's all that unites us, basically. I
leave the floor for you, and you discuss this issue. And thank you very much for this
thank you
conference.
Very much.
And goodbye for everybody. Bye bye. Thank you.
So probably we would go back to Mr. Lorenzo and ask him one specific question that arose from the discussion. How do you estimate the involvement of other NGOs? The logic of the question is very simple. Because countries, in some other countries, not from Africa, huge countries like China, they should not be involved in this conflict. And Stanislav Vasilievich specifically said that we should stop external pressure. Maybe some humanitarian organizations should be more involved in this issue, should help with the problems on the local level, not engaging in some political debate. So how would you estimate the involvement of the other NGOs now? Do they work enough, or probably no?
Unfortunately, the problem is really the fact that we feel very much alone in Tigray. We know that we in terms of international presence, it's extremely limited, and also the UN had faced the similar challenges in terms of accessing areas. We know that this I let a bit the UN communicating on through their own means in terms of also inter-agency missions carried out in Amara, but also needs assessment in Tigray, Northwest, early December. But the problem, in a way, it's not that, like in other contexts, we have a humanitarian circus. Not at all. The question is more on the contrary, the isolation of this area, of Tigray in particular, and the fact that basically because the humanitarian situation is extremely dire, and the population is really not able to start any kind of recovery, the livelihood activities are extremely limited. We would actually call for easing access to humanitarian. So I cannot really talk about all assessment of other humanitarian organizations, because in Tigray we feel rather very much alone.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will have to leave in 10 minutes as well, just for your information. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have the next remarks from our next speaker, Dr. Wolbert Schmidt, an anthropologist and a historian who recently was speaking for HCE on the issue of Tigray and impressed everybody there. So, Professor Schmidt, are you ready?
Yes, I'm here. By the way, Schmidt, not Schmidt, because
I'm sorry.
No problem. It's a Dutch name, not a German name.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. As the speaker before had said, 10 minutes or 10 hours are not enough to even give you some sort of basic hints. And you will not be surprised that I very much agree about some of the points of the speaker before and very much disagree with some of the points. I disagree especially about the optimism of about the last years. But again, this would need 10 hours and not 10 minutes. But let me come to the main points. I'm speaking about, let's say, I'm giving you elements on the background of the conflict, especially in political culture, and in history, which is both strongly interlinked. So I just mentioned a number of points. So I'm going partially back in time. Partially, I'm trying to describe some sort of structural issues which are very visible in this conflict and which had been visible in previous conflicts. One, if we observe Ethiopia and the Ethiopian regions, including its neighbors, we see a multitude of narratives about Ethiopia and about themselves. So there is a federalism of thought in the sense of a destabilized, chaotic federalism, and very often a federalism in the sense of ignorance of the other, but still being caught by a multitude of opinions. So this sounds maybe very abstract, but let me explain. First on myself, because this also explains you why I'm choosing this approach. I'm an ethnohistorian. I'm working on the different histories, in plural, of the different regions and political regions and populations of the Ethiopian region. And among others, I'm focusing on not only the objective history and what we can learn from the historical documents, but also on the idea about their own history found in these different populations. So I've been working in Tigray, in Afar, in Somali area, in Amhara, especially Gojam, in some field research, and also somewhere in Oromia and in Debubesboch in the southern nations. So in specific selected places, which I should say is not enough to understand Ethiopia. This is also one of the first things to be said, that those claiming to give a good explanation, they're usually deeply rooted in one specific setting, and very rarely know about totally different settings, which still mark the politics and the political culture of the region. So this is very important. So this is also part of the chaos of understanding and misunderstanding of the conflict, because people come with their specific settings, even not in a manipulative way. There's also such people, but a lot of approaches are not manipulative as such, but based on a very specific setting of interpretations of political traditions, which, however, contradict others. So in general words, I would say Ethiopia is not one country, not at all. Some people will say that's banal because every country has a multitude of opinions and settings, even regional settings. No, it's not banal. It's much more dramatic than in any other country which I tried to study to some degree. In Ethiopia, there's one very specific phenomena. If one goes to Addis and interacts with Addis Ababa and interacts with specific parts of the community, let's say the better educated sort of bourgeois, if we want to use that term, people who are urbanized, they don't know at all and have never heard about the quarter of the Black people, I use local terms, local terminology, descendant of slaves who were displaced who had been displaced 3 generations before and still living in poverty in this isolated area, they will not even have, very often not have any contact to that area. Within Addis Ababa, within a range of 100 to 500 meters, you already find such a diversity. You would go into Afar circles, Muslim Afar circles, which meet in specific houses, which have a very wide political and economic network with a very vivid communication. You go 1 kilometer further, you are in the middle of Addis Ababa University. They have never heard about the center of Afar interconnections and talk, this sort of political center of Afar, informal political center, just outside the gates of the university. This is just to illustrate it. This is not to blame anyone. We have to start with a diagnosis. And the diagnosis, one of the first diagnoses in Ethiopia is one basic setting is this unknown element of federalism. There is functional federalisms which are based on the identification and recognition of different regions and different populations in a country. In this case, we are just in a sort of very first stage of federalism, which had been attempted 30 years ago by the new government, then new government of the EPRDF, which said this extreme multitude of contradictions of Ethiopia need to be integrated in a new form of a state by a recognition of regional states. These regional states sometimes work rather well, sometimes are also marked by some functional reforms. Others are unstable, marked by a weak state, by a partially oppressive state. So again, this is not a functional federalism which had been started in that time, but was a first attempt of a response to this multitude of perspectives. I spoke too much about this aspect. It's just to give you an idea. It needs to be substantiated by much more examples, evidently, but now I just put this idea in the center. Another point, another factor, which marks this conflict and has marked conflicts before, it's the principle of enmity, the principle of political enmity. Enmity means not that I, as a representative of a group or as a member of a group, believe that we have enemies. That's not as simple as that. But the principle, the political principle of enmity as a system of political rule, of a system of political communication. There's the system of political communication in the sense of unifying myself with partners who then join me in a specific political project. And those who do not join, they are not competitors. They are not opposition. They are enemies. This is a political structure which has marked Ethiopia, especially during the last 100 years, very, very clearly. This is deeply enrooted in specific elements of political culture, but have also been increased in its violence and its potential during the last, I would say, 50 years, especially starting from the military regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam, and since then has never left Ethiopia. But even before we find this phenomena, in a very short formula, if there's a new government, the new government tries to get legitimacy by declaring quickly or not so quickly, but within a rather short time, this usually happens, by declaring the previous government a government of evil people, of abusers, of enemies of Ethiopia. So the new government usually defines itself by defining the previous government as an enemy of Ethiopia. We have it already in the case of Emperor Haile Selassie, who declared his predecessor Lijiyasu, not Menelik, an enemy of Ethiopia. And this happened again and again and again. We have a cycle of 100 years of repetition of this as a political principle. We also find this political principle now in the arguments even among foreigners about the war, declaring that one side has done these and these and these evil things. Very often it's true. It depends, however, who is speaking. Sometimes 90% of it is not true, but there's usually truth in it. So we have to be careful. We cannot say everyone is doing the same. No, they are not. They all have different approaches, but the structural element is the one which is important. This is what I want to focus on. The principle that I have to win against the one who wants to destroy me, my community, and the state of Ethiopia. So what is the state of Ethiopia is usually defined by closed groups who try to either integrate groups into this closed group, and if they don't agree to be integrated, they are excluded and defined as enemies. So the terrorism laws and also the practice of declaring specific groups as terrorists is a very good example for that, and that's also marking this war, and is also one factor why the Ethiopian government uses a lot of energy in explaining why they cannot negotiate. In short, first, let's destroy the enemy and then we can negotiate. That's the pattern. This doesn't work. This is a machine of war. So in short, I want to say Ethiopia, since quite a long time, due to this very basic political structure, is a sort of war machine. And this war machine has not been identified as a war machine by the leaders. So the leaders have not worked in stopping this principle, but in the contrary, in times of power struggle, in times of challenge, they use it actively. And here I have to say, no, we cannot be optimistic about the current government. No, we cannot be optimistic about the reforms by the prime minister, because very quickly the idea of enmity had been integrated in the discourses already in 2018. The moment, that's now my third point, what are reforms? Where are reforms going on? Reforms have to start with such phenomena. They have to start to work on very long-term institutional developments. This is true reforms. Reforms are not the liberation of prisoners, which one had been decided again and again during the last 30 years and again practiced during the last 30 years, sometimes to a bigger degree, sometimes to a smaller degree, but in this moment, it had been done in a sort of very theoretical way, very impressive, very positive at the first sight, but first sight is just first sight, and that's the point. Reform means going into the structures which cause the repeated appearance of conflicts and heavy violent oppositions. If reform works on that, we can call them reforms. If reforms do not touch that, we cannot call them reforms. In the contrary, it will just give space, and here I agree very much with the speaker before, it will give space to violent actors who want to use this sort of power vacuum to fill it in with their own dream of the state. And this is what exactly had happened starting from 2018. Now, next point, but directly linked with it, we have seen, especially during the last 50 years, a sort of romanticism for radical solutions among political groups in Ethiopia. This is part of modernity. We have seen it in many states of the world. And this idea that something is fundamentally wrong, that's why we have to start from the beginning, start from the scratch, is one of the diseases of intellectual life of Ethiopia. This is typical for modernity in many countries of the world, but Ethiopia being a weak state with again and again being in crisis seems to prove that something is wrong. So this kind of experience of something being wrong empowers radical groups to come up with radical solutions. And these radical solutions can be return to imperial Ethiopia. Let's empower the old elites, for example, and create an old style form of unity, and educating all the others by integrating them under such a hierarchical system. This is one dream. In positive words, monarchy, in negative words, imperialism. That's one radical solution, which is heavily discussed among some groups. Other groups say, no, the only solution is the total breakup of the country. By the way, in Eritrea, we have a number of people who say the only hope for the entire region is the total breakup of everything, so that from Eritrea, a new order can be done of the entire region. So there is a tendency of radical solution starting from the scratch, which also means removing all achievements which have been done, which is linked with some factors which I mentioned before. Historically, it's not enough, but I come to the end. Historically, we see also one very, very important element. There is a sort of dreamlike talking internationally about Ethiopia. I call it dreamlike. It's the idea that Ethiopia is 3,000 years old. That's a problem by itself. It creates and it nourishes misconceptions and an incapacity of analysis of what's really going on. The Ethiopian state is for sure thousands of years old in some of its elements. It is a result of continuities and breakups. It's a result of continuities of political developments, which are sometimes very ancient, and that's part of my own research. I'm also interested in societies about 2,000 to 3,000 years old back. I'm working on that. So it's a reality, but this reality is largely misunderstood. The Ethiopian state in its modern structures, including in its oppressive structures, is 100% modern. There's nothing ancient about it. It had been built up, especially after Emperor Menelik, by Haile Selassie and the following military government and the following EPRDF government. That's one factor. So the instruments of the state are modern weapons, modern streets, modern health centers, modern schooling. All this didn't exist before. It has totally changed and radically changed Ethiopia. That's one element. The other element is simply territory. 2/3 of the Ethiopian territory did not belong to Ethiopia historically. Just until the middle of the end of the 19th century, 2/3 of today's Ethiopia were part of other states, African states, which are often overlooked because they were not as internationally linked as the Ethiopian state and not Christian as the Ethiopian state, like the Empire of Kaffa, like the different kingdoms of Oromo, like the sultanates, which were Somali and Afar, which were sometimes in diplomatic relations with each other, sometimes in competition, including in war-like relationships. These conflicts within Ethiopia are also more ancient conflicts of different groups whose relationship until today has not been solved. So by integration of 2/3 of today's Ethiopia into this modern country, a heavy imbalance has been established. A system of elites from the center, which dominate other territories, very often in disrespect and disregard of their own political structures and political institutions, which again and again lead into rebellion. Ethiopia is marked by a series of rebellions which come very often from these territories. And in the center, Ethiopia is marked by heavy competition of leading groups, among others, Amhara leading groups and Tigray leading groups. However, this competition has been, during the last 100 years, been put into a heavy imbalance because especially the center, which is Amhara-based, has had access, especially until the military dictatorship, to a lot of economic possibilities, which has empowered this center, together with a rather oppressive state, and this imbalance is not solved until today. I should finish here, just a last phrase on the war itself. This war is a symptom of these structural problems, which have not been tackled by any reform so far. Some reformers have tried to work on it, but I think there is also a lack of self-diagnosis. So we have not to blame foreign actors, even if they are a factor in it, but self-diagnosis and inner power struggle is the main element in it. And this current war is just a symptom of all this. And about more detailed question about what's going on in the war, who's arming whom, I'm happy also to respond in some way. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And we have a lot of questions for you. I see at least 3 questions. So the first question is from Alexei. He asks about the role of Amhara-Tigray relations in the current conflict, how those tensions contribute to the conflict.
Yeah. thank you. This is part of my last remark. So just for time reasons, I will not extend it very much. But one very basic element is federalism, which I tried to sketch very, very briefly, is not a completed project. It's a sort of idea which had been introduced in Ethiopia in response to much more ancient federalism and an existing multitude of identities, but it's an incomplete response. However, this incomplete response has had two effects. One, the centralist tendencies of the state have not been abolished. With centralist tendencies, I want to say that power groups in the center, by the way, not only Tigrayans. This is one of the really falsifying discourses. Some Tigrayans and some very powerful Tigrayans in central positions, some Oromo, some Amhara in very central positions, by the way, practically from the beginning, and especially during the last 10 years, more and more. So no, it is not an ethnic domination. It was not an ethnic domination, but not in the pure sense. While there were elements of ethnic domination, I totally agree. I just want to make sure that we do not see it as a purely a conflict between Tigray and Amhara, but it's a conflict about state identity, a conflict about what are these elites doing with the state. And here we have an inherent inner conflict between the elites of the state, which were traditionally very much Amhara speaking, not purely Amhara in the ethnic sense, but national elites, which were marked by Amhara traditions, by Ethiopian state traditions, and other people who step by step got into that modern system, which created power struggle within. So in short, there's a contradiction between the federalist model, which is incomplete, which kept some centralist elements, which was part of the problem, because this allowed autocracy and elements of dictatorship. I don't say dictatorship because it's not true in every situation and every region, because we had reforms, democratic reforms, and dictator-like actions in the same time. This is very important to say. Ethiopia is extremely diverse, and also in this. But there was this power struggle, and in the same time, and on the other hand, there was this idea of a centralist state, which was very much led by those who inherited the older dreams of a unified state, which never existed, by the way. So we do not have here a purely Amhara-Tigray contradiction, but we have a contradiction of power elites, and yes, these contradictions of power elites are focusing mainly on Amhara and Tigrinya speaking people. However, that's not as simple as that. Sorry, now it was again a bit complex and a longer answer than I planned.
Not at all. It was very good. And in addition to the previous question, we have a question about Oromo Liberation Army. We know that the Oromos are very diverse people themselves. So what the Oromian part of the story in this conflict?
Yeah, thank you so much. The OLA is again a response to an unsolved problem. You all know, and I don't need to repeat it, that in the beginning of the reform, the government, Abiy Ahmed, had invited a number of different political positions and actors, including militant actors, including very militant actors, not only militant, very militant ones, who had in the center of their action, their political organization, the idea of a violent overthrow of the government and even of the political structure of Ethiopia. All of them had been invited by Abiy Ahmed in 2018 to participate in the building up of a new Ethiopia. We don't know if it was naive. We don't know if this was just tricky in the sense of let them be neutralized by letting them come back. We have an eye on them. I think it's an open debate. But what happened in that time is, one, some of these actors really entered into the state apparatus, trying to find their place. Yes, a majority of actors found that they cannot control the reform. They cannot control the reform even in the militant sense they were thinking of. we should not forget there were a lot of militant ideas behind these movements, and realizing that there is no political dynamics which allows them a real political space, again led to the recreation of and redefinition of resistance, unavoidable. And what happened in 2018 to 2019, we saw that the Ethiopian government was more integrating radical elements from political groups with Amhara background, among them the so-called Gunbat Sabat, who formed into a so-called opposition party, but heavily allied with some part of the Ethiopian government, while those representing the militant Oromo movements, OLF, were step by step and very quickly sidelined, even though those people who were strong reformers on the Oromo side, but being part of the Ethiopian government, not part of the OLF, like the former Oromo president Lemma, had been sidelined, because there's no way that their aims, their federalist aims, can reconcile with the radical ideas of the political groups who were co-opted to the Ethiopian government. So by default, the militant actors who went in had to break with the Ethiopian government after a rather short time. This is exactly what happened during 2019, which again leads to resistance. We have to make one analysis, one diagnosis. These groups like OLA, Oromo Liberation Army, are not the cause for the conflicts, but again, they are a response to structures of oppression and the fear, also to the fear of a re-establishment of a rather imperialist or imperial center, which would be a repetition of previous experiences of oppression of large regions of Ethiopia. So this is a response to it. And that's why I would say OLA is extremely powerful, potentially extremely powerful, not in the military sense, even this is added to it, but in the sense of having a sort of natural representation of the problems of the Oromo populations and other populations who cannot identify with this state. The state has failed giving them appropriate responses.
Thank you very much. And we have the last question. It was very interesting, but we have time limits. So
yeah.
The last question from Valery, and he basically asks the following question. You've mentioned that there are some structural factors that define the current deadlocks, but do we have some new reasons, new factors that can play in either way, or in favor of improving the situation, or in favor of something bad with the political organization of the country?
Yeah. The problem is time, as you say. The problem when you are rushing, you say things which are incomplete, and then people will not be happy, and they are right not to be happy. So again, it's very complicated. But let me say, in short, the basic identity of the Tigrayan political parties in plural, not only Tplf, is federalism, is regional autonomy. This is not only because it's a modern idea, but it's deeply ingrained into the Ethiopian populations. Wherever you go, you find very large, strongly developed local ways of self-organization, including defending their land. Also, the previous speaker has mentioned that defending the land is absolutely crucial for everyone, every farmer, and including also every nomad who are very strongly linked with their land. It's heavily ingrained in their political and social and cultural identity. So a state which does not reform itself in the sense that such kind of a grab of land can be stopped, but would reform itself in the form of respect of local ownership of their own land. This state will reproduce wars like the one of now. And that's precisely what had happened during the last 3 years. we have not seen any tendency of respect of local political processes, even in competition with the center, which is natural in a strongly federal state like Ethiopia. There was no respect for it. No, the response, the classical response was, they are the enemies of the unity of Ethiopia. Then a lot of political, let's say, fantasies, including violent war fantasies, which I know during the last 30 years of my stay in Ethiopia as fantasies, they have been realized on the ground with heavy war crimes committed on the ground. So there is something absolutely logic in the sense of development of this conflict. As long as these basic structures are not tackled, this conflict, the Tigray conflict, but also the other conflicts like the Oromo conflicts, will pop up again and again, as long as it is not solved in the sense of integration and recognition of a real federalization, not solved in the sense of removing the enemies, because removing the enemies at the end means removing entire Ethiopia. Ethiopia has this tendency of defining everyone as an enemy at some point in history, so at the end no one is alive. So this structure is the real enemy of Ethiopia, this thinking structure. So what is new now in the conflict is that a number of fantasies, violent fantasies of removal of enemies have been practiced on the ground with an extreme high degree of radicalism. So this is new. And this is also new in the sense that this will have consequences probably, which are beyond what history has shown us. So we are in a new chapter in this sense.
Thank you very much. That's it for this part of the discussion, and we have the next speaker. As I was told, it's enough for scholars to speak, and we have a person from business to present his view. CEO of 10 Green Gigawatt for Ethiopia company, Mikhail Gorsky. Sorry if I pronounced your name or surname incorrectly. Sometimes the floor is yours. You have, if you have remarks, you may.
Good. Thank you, guys. You hear me okay?
Okay.
Okay, good. I'm sorry, I'm on the street. There's huge traffic, so I stopped at the place where I was not supposed to stop. So see a lot of noise around. Anyway, yeah, thank you. Yeah, first of all, absolutely, I'm a businessman. I'm not the scholar. So two things. First, if you're looking for work, you can try to touch me. And second, I'm not that big on the concepts. Second, I'm Ethiopian. So my office is in Addis, and a lot of the activity that we are doing is with Russia. So again, about work. And point number three, I trust data. I don't trust opinions or concepts or stuff. I trust data, and it's not that hard to see the data in our world when everything is online, more or less, or somewhere recorded. Not opinions, not the data. So that's it. That's about me. I'm in a business. I'm Ethiopian. My office is in Addis. I'm now not in Addis. That's why I have decent internet connection. Otherwise, I would not have it. Yeah, about the conflict. Before like talking about the conflict, two things, what it is not. Kind of important. I'm also a mathematician by education, so definitions are good. And what is it not? It's not ethnic. As Walbert said, it's not ethnic. It's not Tigrayans against something. For many reasons. One is that no rhetoric of the parties are ethnic. And the second is that, well, at least on the federal side, you will see a lot of different nationalities of Ethiopia. I'm not sure. Well, and the Tigrayan also tried to do this mixed thing. Like anyway, so it's not ethnic. And second, it's not like freedom fighters against the oppressive government, like one can think watching CNN. Certainly not. They are as far from the freedom fighters as any Marxist will be. They are Marxists, so they are pretty evil just by this. We probably all have some background with Marxists. Going further, like what is TPLF? That is one part of it. First of all, it's pretty totalitarian force. When it was part of the main part of the EPRDF from 91 to 19, probably 2019, you can say, when Prosperity Party was formed. So it was pretty totalitarian and authoritative and pretty oppressive. Number of people they killed in 2015 will be in thousands at least. In Addis, there were protests after the elections that were rigged, and well, the scenario that most of the Russian-speaking people see a lot. So there was protests, and there were the machine guns and snipers on the street of Addis. So they killed a lot of people, and they were killing, they were putting in prison, a lot of things. And the thing is, and I wanted to ask Nislav Vasilievich about this, the corruption and the number of money that were taken out of the country. It's impressive. Meles was man of ideas, man of big ideas, man of interesting ideas, but for some reason, people around him, including his wife, for example, were pretty greedy. They had almost like, I don't know, I have the, some my friends will say that like half of the country was like belonged to Meles family or friends of Meles, certainly to Effort, that was the nonprofit foundation that they created. You can Google, there are even transparency report notes on the how much money taken out by TPLF. There is some more scholarly reports on the structure of how the party was, the, well, EPRDF as the ruling party and TPLF, actually like the main force of it, were like extracting money from the country. So they got pretty substantial amount of money taken out of the country. Some will estimate $30 billion. It's not, again, like as big as we probably see in even the former Soviet Union, but still it's some money. $30 billion in that part of the world give you a lot of opportunities. So to put like in the context, what is TPLF group? I would say like brothers in the business would be something like Yanukovych, Turkmenbashi, Kerimov, Bakassa, and others. So this thing was ousted from the power, and happened something that didn't happen anywhere else in the world. They came to arms. Yanukovych, for some reason, did not build the army and did not came back to Kiev fighting. But Debretsion was had enough, like, I don't know what, grit, aventurism, I don't know, something.
Maybe
Kerimov
taste,
did not.
maybe taste for power.
That's not, yeah, that's very important because they had nowhere else to go. They were unable to, well, they probably cannot go to America for the families and the friends, and all of them, or everyone in TPLF leadership have families in America. I think grandkids already. Debretsion, all families in America. None. There is no one who would not be in States. More junior officers of TPLF will have people in Switzerland, will have people in some in London, some in France, some in Belgium. Belgium is where Meles was treated, so some part of his friends have there. So we probably, well, we have some idea where they are. Anyway, the TPLF leaders were not thinking of leaving the country, and they have enough money to buy themselves a nice army. The army that TPLF built in Tigray was about 250,000 people. It can be even more now because they had their resources, and they are not conservative using them. So that's what they did. They had money to build army. They had connections. For 27 years in power is a lot of time. probably you've seen a recent video of Tplf former Ethiopian former minister of the foreign relationship talking to former American, German, Japanese, and other ambassadors, but people on pretty high standing, although they're former guys. But there's a lot of sympathy just because they worked together for a long time, and because, well, they are nice people generally. They are educated, they are well-spoken. We Ethiopians know how to talk, so it's not hard to see why they are nice and pleasant. And for 27 years in power, they have very good relationships. Like Susan Rice, for example. If you will locate on YouTube her speech at the burial on the after death of the Meles Zenawi, his body was brought to Addis, and it was very grand ceremony. And Susan Rice had very touchy speech, very sensitive. How big friends they are. Oops. Sorry. Okay, so they have friends, they have connections, and it's they easily converted it into very good PR. So what we see, what we hear is very good. Also, they have trained military under the EPRDF or Tplf regime. All the high officers were Tigrayans. When we hear that regime was not ethnically clean, it's not correct. All generals were Tigrayans. All high officers were Tigrayans. All top managers of the state-run corporations were Tigrayans. Tigrinya, you probably know how to call them better. So when they were ousted out of the power, they went to Tigray state, and all generals were moved there. So the army had not much of the senior commander. It's that happened, and also what helps Tplf. Sorry. Present thing is stereotypes in the West. West doesn't care much about Ethiopia. What is Ethiopia? It's nowhere. We don't know where it is. We don't know how big is it. So people can easily understand simple stereotypes. Like a recent panic in Addis, if you watch the Facebook page of the American embassy, you see the notes that you have to leave the country. And the stereotype is simple. It's Kabul. Everybody knows how big was the trouble in Kabul. So now American embassy is almost transmitting the information that like Addis is Kabul now. And it's so far from the reality. It's just funny. It's purely funny. If you go to the Facebook page, you will see that these comments from American embassy have like 5,000 smiles on it as a reaction to the Facebook claim about you have to leave the country, it's dangerous, we will help everyone. 5,000 smiles. No, really, because like people live normal lives, kid goes to the kindergarten, everything, like restaurants are open, nightclubs are open, nothing. And just the American embassy like with this. So stereotypes helps a lot. It helps CNN, of course, to tell the story about the dying children, about the terrible war, about the impossible humanitarian situation. That is bad, but we have to understand that why we don't have the oil transferred to Tigray, because there is army that needs oil. I mean, like petrol, benzene. Yeah. So why there is no petrol delivered to the Tigray? Because there is 250,000 people, army that they have trucks, they have tanks, and there is no clear way to see who is getting this petrol or who is not. So obviously there is issues with that. But on the CNN, it will play very nicely as the humanitarian catastrophe that the oppressive federal government is helping to make stronger. So what I'll try to finish because I can be sure. I hope try to be short. Well, so the advantages on Tplf is simple. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of soldiers, they have a lot of port and very people who are very susceptible to lies and to money, of course. But what the problem? Problem number one is the strategy. There is no way forward. What is the idea of Debrecen? That he will be again ruling the country? No, never. He will never rule the country. And like Stanislav Vasilyevich was saying, about 7%. My statistics is like 6 or 5% Tigrayans. So we have like 95% of the country that is fed up with the Tigrayans ruling the country. So there is no way forward there. Size of Tigrayans, they're small. And the vulnerability. Actually, as soon as someone would be able to prove the corruption, and it was not done before, I'm not representative of the government. I don't work for the Ethiopian government in any way. So my concern is, and I tried to voice it, but nobody listened to me, is why you don't do research into the money that were stolen from the country, because all Tplf leaders will be very vulnerable if we'll prove that their families are living on the illegal money in the Western world. So they're vulnerable. It's a problem that can be easily solved, I think, by, I don't know, like 10 hackers from Israel can construct everything. It's very easy. So they have problems. They have assets. One of their problems is the size. They're not that big as they would like to be. So it's not hard to predict the outcome of the conflict. It's just very simple. Well, you are like you are 6% of the country. What's your future? There is no future. It's question of time. It's question of whether prime minister would stop playing Swedish person and start do war, because so far he is not that much. It's not war. It's well, to my taste, it's kind of nice, but probably it's good not to kill the people, but it does not help to solve the problem. So probably, Ivan, I'm really worried about it's number 5, too much glasses of wine. Anyway, I'm sorry, guys. Yeah, so what's the future? Next, for 1 year, the future is war. It's impossible to think about something else. It will be war over there. North will be not accessible, unfortunately. No one will celebrate Christmas this year or next year in Rydale and Gondar. It's also not tourists. Well, people probably will do, but tourists will not. So 1 year, I think it's war. 2-year perspective is recovery. You have to rebuild. They destroyed almost everything over there. They destroyed the power stations. I'm in energy. I'm electric energy in a business of energy. They destroyed. If they hate their own region. They hate Tigray region because they destroyed everything, and they destroyed a lot of hospitals. So it's all have to be recovered. The government cannot be at the position that it's taken today. Today, the position is that we moved out of the area and let's like Tplf manage it. It doesn't work this way. So we'll have to recover. Country will have to recover. North, it will have to rebuild Amhara and Afar. And Tplf guys, they bring a lot of destruction. You can see even like very recent, like yesterday, today, photographs of the hospital in Kambolcha, hospitals in Desi, airport in Lalibela. It's a lot of destruction. So it's a lot of recovery. And the 3rd year will be peace. Obviously, well, because where else it can go? It can go to peace. It would not be like in Germany, because I think Germany killed all who it needs to kill like a couple hundred years ago in all this inter like nationalities, inter city fight or something. Ethiopia have not yet done that. It will be a long road. We should understand that the society is not yet in the like 21st century in a full scale, but it would be what is considered to be peace in Ethiopia. Yeah, and I think it's very interesting that what's going on helped Ethiopia and helped Prime Minister Abiy to be truly leader. There is new movement called No More. It's about like stopping the oppression, stopping the colonization, like new colonization approach. And this No More movement is considered not only as CNN stop like telling lies about Ethiopia. It's also considered for like Black people to support Africa, for Africa to unite. It's strong, and what's going on now in Ethiopia puts Ethiopia in leadership position just because like all eyes are at Ethiopia, and Abiy Ahmed as the unquestionable leader of Ethiopia. It's like I haven't seen many people who are not supporting him. To me, as the person who grew up in Moscow, obviously this like cult does not feel very good, but well, that's what it is. It's not that much pushed by the government. It very much goes from the grassroots. So he is certainly a leader here, and with this movement that we see, Ethiopia is kind of leader for the Africa in the at least ideological terms. There are events, rallies, and the protests in front of the embassy, American embassy in, I think like now, like 10, 15 countries. We had fun in Jerusalem a few days ago. You can find me on Facebook. I think it was public. I was broadcasting from the embassy, American embassy. We had the protest. It was fun. Like when like people were crying some slogans, but then they turned on music and it was only dancing. So it was very nice Ethiopian demonstration. Yeah, so I just wanted to address most of the questions. Again, I'm sorry, I'm a mathematician. I'm going with the list of questions and I'm addressing them all. I'm taught this way. And I feel that like in 3 years, you will be able to come to Ethiopia and use your knowledge and everything will be good. There is no reason for pessimism. It's a lot of work, unfortunately, a lot of blood and a lot of pain. And I'm extremely sad about fate of the kids growing up in all that area, all north, because it will be all terrible. It will be all terrible. Rebels will do rebellion thing, what they can do. They will destroy something, they will kill somebody. And the international organizations will do the risk assessment in the wrong way. I have hard time getting the contractors for the projects that I'm doing. We're paying like real money, but most companies are saying, no, we cannot go there. So it's problem. Investors are also very shy. Of course, it's not good. It's not good. But sooner or later it will change. It's pretty simple. What else can be? Okay, I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have questions, but firstly, I want to ask you some question. You said that we should expect at least 3 years for the solution of the conflict. Maybe it's too much time because investment will go down, tourism will go down. It's not good for the country. And my question is very simple. Is there any chance to compromise in 1 year or 2 years? Maybe just to have negotiations and to start talking even to those people who are very negative in the past. as
well, I'm not in any way or form a government official, so I have no idea what they will say answer to this. But usually what the ambassadors are saying when the journalists ask them, they say that it's hard to communicate with terrorists. America does not talk with Osama bin Laden, so we're not talking to people who are destroying our villages or killing our soldiers. And if you remember how it all started on the night from 3rd of November to 4th of November, Tplf militia attacked the military base near Mekelle, I think, and killed several hundred of the soldiers. It's not the position that you want to negotiate with them. What you will be offering them to kill more people, I cannot see. They have nothing in the way of like constructive dialogue, because well, we'll not go into the discussion about the Ethiopian federalism. It's interesting and funny, and how much like it's what Meles wanted, or that he just wanted to dominate, and that was the bond that he threw to the intelligentsia to discuss. Anyway, when I'm talking about 3 years, I'm saying that hot part of the conflict will be over in a year. When it comes to the investors, Wolbert is from Germany in some way or form. On your LinkedIn page, you're still employee of Mekelle University, but I don't think so. I'm not sure that Mekelle University working right now, thanks to Tigray friends. Anyway, so Germany, the Minister of Technology and something of Germany was 2 weeks ago in Addis, 2 weeks ago, within the conflict. A German Agency for International Development right now is buying the energy project in Ethiopia. So I would not say that even now, when we certainly have very hot phase of the conflict, that everything is stopped. Of course, it's down. It will be down during the hot part, so next year for certain. Then I think the biggest thing will change, that Ethiopia probably will not be happy working with America any longer. It's just not something that the country will, that the American-Ethiopian relationship will survive. What the State Department is doing is stupid. I have no idea. Maybe Trump killed everyone, and like Biden have no one to work with. Maybe something else. But it's very questionable. I don't see USAID working in Ethiopia any longer. It's an opportunity for Germany, for Europe. I don't see any other countries who will be doing that, because Chinese have their own Chinese problems. Turkey is small at the moment, although some Turkish delegation was in Addis last week. So nothing has stopped that much. You're totally right. It's very much. It's very bad. It's very bad for the investment, and I think that it's 1 year. I don't see talks or like peace talks or something as a way forward, because what's the point? Eat our babies, please. Here are more of our innocent babies. Eat them all, and hope you will stop. No, people have drones for this kind of conversation. You don't. I don't know. Americans don't use peace talks to talking to Al Qaeda.
Well, sometimes they did that in the past, but that was kept secret for several years. Maybe, but we've heard that answer. Thank you very much. Do we have more questions? It's very actually good to listen to people on the ground who feel what is going on, who live normal lives in a huge city So we see behind you your customers, and that work is going on. So everything is probably all right. So that's very promising for us.
If you read what is behind me, you would see it's certainly not Addis.
It's not. Oh. Okay. Okay.
Although some people are saying, wow, Israel, you have war all the time. It's so dangerous. Probably American embassy should evacuate. I don't know. Probably it's a good idea for them. And many other countries, because the claims about the instability in Addis is coming from so many embassies, I've lost count. It's really stupid. It's like nothing is going on, nothing, like really kids going to the kindergarten, nothing.
Well, I have one additional question. Our university basically teaches diplomacy. So what Russia can do for that conflict for Ethiopia right now? Do we have any additional options or some helping mechanisms that we are not using right now?
The only way to, I'm in Israel, so the only way to answer your question is by question. What resources Russia has?
We have,
because if Russia has money for the international activity, there's a lot of good that can be done. But I'm not sure that Russia has really have money for the international activity. We are talking with anyway, with head of Россотрудничества about the Balcha hospital in Addis. It's something, that's something that, well, it's Russian Red Cross, etc. So everything is there, but I'm not sure that Russia has money, just purely like money to have the soft power and to do some good. So there are many things like good things that can be done. And it's on the level of diplomacy, like words are cheap. So yeah, everything, Russia is doing everything. Like in the United Nations, there were several statements, like we think that it's sovereign question, so Ethiopia should be dealing with that. All words are done. Like the ambassador spoke 2 weeks ago, Evgeny Evgenyevich, last name eluded me, but he spoke about he supports the government. It's all nice. The question is like real help, real activity, something real, something tangible. That's what's needed, because words are good, but well, Russia is saying good words, China is saying good words, Turkey is saying good words, but country needs medical help, country needs all kind of help. And the recovery phase that will be probably in a year will need more. So it's very easy.
Thank you very much. Do we have more questions? It's really enjoying that the businessman talks about money. That's a good stuff, really. So
okay, good.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have last person, but last is not the least. So we have Kassa Geber Johannes, an old friend of the African Club, and the former diplomat of the Ethiopian embassy in Moscow. Mr. Geber Johannes, are you with us?
Yes.
Yes.
Good evening.
The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm very pleased to join you this evening. The African Club, I often frequented the African Club, and it is very interesting platform. It is a platform of interaction and mutual learning. So thank you for inviting me. The topic you choose today is very timely and very strategic. It will provide us good information and knowledge about current developments, not only in Ethiopia, but the Horn of Africa, in Africa, and how the international community is also reacting. And in this regard, what will be the chances for Russia will be also to play a positive role in this conflict will be addressed. In my 10 minutes presentation, I will focus on the genesis of the conflict, on the involvement of foreign forces and the consequence of the war, on how African institutions failed to stop the war and how they became irrelevant in the conflict, and the failure of the international community to stop crime against humanity, especially how the United Nations Security Council failed to tackle such regional crisis, the opportunity for Russian diplomacy and the way forward. This will be, I will give highlights on the basis of these topics. It is not a pleasant subject for friends to discuss this topic. In the previous years, we were discussing on the role of Ethiopia in the Horn of Africa, and Africa at large. We are talking about the fast-growing country in the world, where Ethiopia was very positive in Russia and in the rest of the world. Now, the topic is changed at international level. We are discussing how to end the internecine war, which is bleeding the country. This is not where you expect us as friends. You expect us to be more responsible and to show leadership in Africa. Hellas, we are here. In the nutshell, I am against the war. I opposed the war while I was in office as deputy head of the Ethiopian embassy in Moscow. I resigned from my profession after serving more than 30 decades of diplomacy because I opposed the war. The war is not a solution for any kind of internal conflict in Ethiopia and elsewhere. How did we reach in a state of war? What are the fundamental causes of the war? Fundamentally, Ethiopian political history. I think one has to go back to the general history of Ethiopia to understand this conflict. Ethiopian political history is a history of the struggle between forces who projected a unitary, homogeneous state by forceful assimilation on the one hand, and forces who struggled to build a multinational state on the basis of unity in diversity. This is the fundamental framework of the Ethiopian political conflict yesterday and today. Ethiopia is a country with several internal nations. I called internal nations because some of them are more than 40 million people. Tigray is about 8 to 10 million population. Oromia is about 40 million, so I say they are internal nations. It is home of several nations who aspire to have their share of role in the country in the framework of multinational federal democracy. The current federal constitution of Ethiopia is crafted in 1995. It is the outcome of the struggle between the two tendencies. It is a balancing act between different forces. The constitution transforms the country into a federal state on the basis of the principle of unity in diversity. Multinational federal state is best suited to countries like Ethiopia, who are characterized by diversity and pluralism. Ethiopia has 9 regions, regional states, and 2 autonomous cities. Tigray is one of the state or the regional state, a historic nation. Tigray has its own identity and it has shared its values to the rest of Ethiopians. The genesis of the crisis. This is a description of Ethiopia, and now I will come to the genesis of the crisis. The EPRDF, the previous ruling party, we call it EPRDF, elected its Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed in 2018. His election, his rise, had given hope to many people, including myself, to people at home and abroad. However, it didn't take him much time to unravel the constitution. He started to undermine the constitutional sharing of power between regional states and the federal center or administration. He started political bulldozing. Reform was used as a cover to violate the existing framework. He appointed regional officials against the constitution. He sought alliances with different paramilitary parties who were exiled in Eritrea. He allied with the Eritrean dictator. The Eritrean dictator had his agenda to revenge the Tigrayan leadership for his defeat in the year 2000, when he invaded Ethiopia. Political assassination was returned back to Ethiopia. Regional leaders in Amhara who opposed his war plan were killed in their office. The Ethiopian chief of the defense forces was killed as part of the reform. Political groups who advocate for basic principles, respect of the constitution, were considered enemies. We observed our country descending downward. Tigray was one of the regions which foiled several attempts of assassination. Finally, the PM decided to eliminate the leadership of Tigray by sending his troops. By the way, you have, I think yesterday the New York Times had come report on who started the war. You could get it in the Google. Now, when you come to the war started. Tigray was invaded on the 4th of November 2020, after months of military preparation. The forces who were involved in the invasion were Ethiopian National Defense Forces, Eritrean National Defense Forces, Somalia, 5,000 troops from Somalia, and the forces of the Amhara Regional State. Amhara Regional State is the adjacent regional state of adjacent region of Tigray, neighboring to Tigray. It was and drones from the United Arab Republic. It was overwhelming, and it was not in the calculation of Tigray. Tigray had only its militias and its police forces. Because of this, the Tigrayan leadership ran away to the countryside to their mountains to continue their resistance. The parties who invaded Tigray have their own objectives. Eritrea had its own objective. Of course, the prime minister's objective is to consolidate his power. Eritrea is to revenge the Tigrayan leadership, and the Amhara regional forces are interested in the Tigray territories. So these are the minor objectives of the invaders of Tigray. I say they are all invaders because the forces internally, the Ethiopian federal government and the Amhara regional government, they attacked Tigray by violating the constitution. So because they violate the constitution, I said it is an invasion. Of course, Eritrea is a foreign power. So these are the facts of the ground. Now, consequences of the war. I think I could say that Tigray is totally scavenged. Nothing is left for Tigray. Of course, rape is used as a weapon. The United Nations have come with 22,000 girls and mothers raped, but Tigray has its own data. It is more than 169,000. So there is a huge gap in the crime of rape. Number two, famine is used as a weapon. Tigray is under siege. It is blocked from all corners. The United Nations is not able to deliver humanitarian aid. People now, the health center is totally 70% of the health sector is destroyed. People were defenseless for several months. They were killed as stateless people. So the humanitarian crisis is very daring, and still there is no solution to this death. The diplomacy of the war. Well, Tigray has no diplomats. The Tigray side has no diplomacy. It is a regional state. The diplomacy of the Ethiopian government is dominating everything. Tigray has only its diaspora who are demonstrating in every quarter in different parts of the world. There are some efforts by some countries and organizations to put the plight of the people of Tigray on the agenda of the United Nations, but until now it is blocked by, there is no resolution as such until today because it is blocked by members of the United Nations. Rather, we see an increasing involvement of foreign powers very recently. We have new drones. Drones for the first time are used in Tigray. First, it was the United Arab Emirates drones. Now we have from Turkey, from Iran, and from China. The drones are devastating the infrastructure of Tigray. Recently, they destroyed the hydroelectric power, which produces more than 300 megawatts for the whole Ethiopia. It is called the Tplf hydro dam. On the role of Russia, now I think Russia should, I think the Russian diplomats should understand that the Ethiopians are fighting among each other. This is very, very important, and they are fighting because of divergence on constitutional matters. Russia should be have a role to be a neutral mediator, and I think Russia could. There is no such any external enemy or intervention from any other side of the world. We only have external intervention from the side of who supports the government, from recently from Turkey, and previously from the United Arab Emirates, and of course from China also. So I think Russia should have a role to play as a neutral mediator, because Russia is a friendly country to all Ethiopians. It's not the government who is friendship is not monopolized by one party. It is the Ethiopians who are traditionally the friends of Russia. The way Russian diplomats handle the case in the United Nations doesn't reflect the fairness of the Russian people and their government. The way forward. Until now, we have only a peace plan from Tigray side, which calls for an all-inclusive political dialogue, for a ceasefire, for unhindered humanitarian access, and for ending the siege. So until, to my knowledge, we have only this, Tigray side had only the peace agenda, but from the Ethiopian government side, we didn't see any peace plan until today. The African Union and of course other institutions have failed to deliver peace. We didn't see active involvement of the African Union. Of course, recently they have assigned special envoy Obasanjo, but still we didn't see any kind of peace plan or agenda, or we didn't know what they are talking. From the rest of the world, we only hear about some expressions of concerns, but still we didn't have any tangible assistance to end the war in Tigray. So the war is still raging in the countryside, and I assure you, war will not bring a solution to the problem. It is only dialogue, all-inclusive dialogue, and peaceful settlement of the crisis that could help the country to regain its dignity. And Russia had a role to play in this regard. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you very much for your speech and for thoughts that you have shared with us. And we have the first question from the Mikhail. You can ask your question. Mikhail, are you still with us?
Yes. I'm with you. I'm sorry, I'm driving, so I'm kind of distracted. The question is very simple about the peace plan. Could you please clarify if that peace plan has the item number 1, remove Abiy Ahmed from power, and then you suggest the all-inclusive dialogue? Is that correct? You don't want to sit with the prime minister. Is that correct?
No, it is not correct. If the answer is, it is an all-inclusive political dialogue. All actors, including those who are in prison and who are in exile and who are also fighting in every part of the countryside. There are several liberation movements in Ethiopia, and some. So all has to come to the table. I think this is a civilized modern solution. So it doesn't.
I'm sorry for being insistent, but what you are saying is groundbreaking, because Debretsion was saying that Abiy should be put into jail, Abiy should be taken out of the power, and only after that, this quote unquote inclusive dialogue can start. Or you are sure that the dialogue can include sitting Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed without his change in the position. So he remains the Prime Minister, and Tplf is willing to sit to the table. Is that correct? Please, just confirm. It's important.
Well, all parties have to come to the table as parties.
So basically, Mikhail, it's practically impossible to remove Prime Minister of the whole federation as of now.
No. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just quoting Debretsion. Debretsion was saying that first we will arrest and put into jail Abiy, and then we will have dialogue. What I hear right now is totally different from this, and that is interesting. I would be happy to see because that well, at least that's new information. I have nothing to do with it. I'm not in the embassy or in the minister, but that is something that will be totally new, because so far all this talks about peace dialogue is a bullshit, because it's like first we will kill you, and then we'll have dialogue with, I don't know who, like maybe your kids. So I just wanted to clarify.
So basically, we can agree that sometimes leaders, political leaders, are saying different things and sometimes those things are not exactly what they mean. So let's agree on that not all that leaders are saying is really truthful. It's politics, for God's sakes. And we have the second question with regards to ceasefire from Mulat to Gabo, if I'm reading it correctly. And Mulat Tugabe asks why the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front did not accept the ceasefire that was back in July. Do you have answer or thoughts on that?
Yes, exactly. Thank you for the question. By the way, on the peace plan, it is published. It is you can find it I mean, in the open, or I could share the peace plan, which is communicated to the rest of the world. So it is a document. And Mikhail could also find it somewhere if he Google it, or I could send him also. For the ceasefire in June, I mean, it is a unilateral ceasefire. The Ethiopian government, after it is defeated militarily in Tigray, it withdrew from parts of Tigray, not from all parts of Tigray, but from part of Tigray. And we are for a negotiated ceasefire. We don't know what is the content of the ceasefire of the Prime Minister. He used it to prepare his to invade again Tigray. So we didn't consider. They didn't consider. It was not considered as a serious ceasefire. So this is why it was rejected, and Tigray is ready for negotiated ceasefire. This is, I think, the answer.
Okay, and maybe I can intervene in those line of questioning. You have mentioned several times about constitutional arrangements to be made in negotiations. What could be the some contours, some thoughts on that constitutional arrangement? What should be changed, basically, in your opinion?
Well, yeah. Well, you know, the current, I think there is a constitution which is in place since 1995. It is a federal constitution. It is based on unity in diversity. Now, there seems, according to me, to my thinking, and of course, according to several Ethiopians, there is a coup d'etat against the constitution. So the constitution is not officially dismantled, but practically it doesn't give the assurance that it is still a working framework. So well, the next things are changed. The dynamics have changed. The politics that created the constitution of 1995 are not there now. Practically, they have changed because of the crimes which are committed in different parts of Ethiopia. And I think what will be the next framework will be part of the agenda of an all-inclusive political dialogue. I cannot preempt what should be changed and what should be maintained, but it will be up to the parties and the people to decide. But I'm sure the internal geopolitics of Ethiopia will be changed practically because of the current situation.
Okay, and let me follow up a little bit on this. You have mentioned several other liberation fronts. Let me finish, and then you will ask your question, right? Is it okay for you? So you have mentioned several liberation fronts, and in your opinion, should they also be part of that constitutional process, meaning that they are given some constitutional status maybe, or it's just a matter of being at the table and discussing some political framework or a new constitution?
Ethiopians have until now failed to establish a political framework based on consensus. I think the future should be framed in such a way that all political actors should have their own voice, irrespective of their strengths. If they have constituency and armed or not armed, they have to be part of the political dialogue. Otherwise, after a few years, we'll be back to zero again. So national dialogue, all inclusive, with everybody has a voice. So I think we have to respect that, and it should be the basis of the future.
Thank you. And we have a question from Mulat Tigabo. Ask your question. So, are you still with us? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for your opportunity, and I'll say thank you for both sides because they include from both sides, and I appreciate this thing. I do have around 3 questions. Actually, the ones that already answered, even though I didn't get any full information about that. Here is my first question. My first question is, what is the immediate cause of the beginning of the war? What was the main reason why we are now in this trouble? The second question, it's about Mr. Kasai already proposed that we have to negotiate at this moment. But if I'm not wrong, one of the Tplf general, who is General Gabriel Tzadek, he already said something about the war is already ended. He already said that they are already victory, and there is no any negotiation regarding with the government. So why now they decide to negotiate? Why now? The third question, because of the Tplf didn't accept the unilateral ceasefire that was launched by the Ethiopian government, they just distribute they mobilize the war to Afar and Amara region, and especially for the timing, the war crimes they are doing right now in Amara and Afar is so worse. Why they are destroying hospitals, manufacturing companies, looting universities, or destroying university. For example, Wollo University, one of industries, they already destroyed one of the building. Why they are doing such kind of thing?
So we have 3 questions. Maybe our last but not least speaker, Mr. Gabriel Johannes, would limit it to 2, because the last question is basically about why in the war there are killings and buildings are destroyed, because it's war. So maybe 2 questions would be enough for us, because we are having this discussion for more than 2 hours. So we have some time limits. So, but basically the first question was about major reason for conflict. And the second question was about their statement of one of the Tplf leaders about victory in that war. So, Mr. Gabriel Johannes, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. Spasiba again. Spasiba. Maybe I'll start with a simple question. On the negotiation. Thank you, Mulat Tagawu, for the questions. I think we have equal worries on our country And thank you for asking this question. And on negotiation, you could also refer to 2, 3, maybe 2 letters which were dispatched to the international community before the start of the war. The Tigray regional president have communicated the world before the war, months before the war, to assist Ethiopia to intervene, to avert the possibility of war in the country. So negotiation is always there, even before the war. War has never been an option for Tigray. Still, you could have quoted General Zarkan, or I have never heard military victory does not mean an end. To military victory itself will not bring peace. Still, with military victory or not, Ethiopians have to sit and negotiate. We have to settle the dust together. So I think this is, and the unilateral ceasefire is not kind of legitimate ceasefire. I mean, if the prime minister wants, he has to discuss with his enemies, according to him. So this is what I could say. On the fundamental causes, I said, well, I could say that Abiy Ahmed was on the process of consolidation of his power. This is number one. You know, Mulatu, you remember what happened in Jijiga. I often start from Jijiga. Abdillah was overthrown in violating the constitution. Abiy Ahmed instructed the leaders of southern regions to withdraw from, to resign from power, and they did. He forced elected president of Oromia, Mr. Atulama. Forcefully, he resigned from power. And you remember also Dr. Ambacho of Amhara region, he was killed in his office. And other regional leaders in Afar were changed. So the only remaining force was Tigray, and Abiy Ahmed had sent several squads, killing squads, commandos to destroy the leadership of Tigray before the war. It was aborted. So I think it was New York Times has also told us this week that he was preparing for the war, and his objective is to destroy and to dismantle the Tigrayan leadership. So this is the reason from the side of Abiy Ahmed. Of course, from Eritrea, they have their own agenda. I think that I could say this is the answer.
So maybe we should stop on that point. I really hope that the next time we'll discuss the post-conflict settlement in Ethiopia, not the conflict itself. I really hope, I do hope. But as for now, we have conflict, and I think that our students are going to make their own conclusions, what is going on, how to address those issues. I thank to everybody. That was very thought-provoking discussion. And if you have something to said as a final statement, maybe you should say something. That's a proper time right now. Valery,
pожалуйста. Yes, I would like to say a few words, because Ivan has asked a very important question about African Club, and I'm glad to present to you our club. I hope in a very short way, because we have exceeded all time limits. So our African Club was founded in 2014 at Mgimo Base, and the most important goals of our club are as follows. Firstly, to dispel negative stereotypes about Africa, Secondly, to contribute to the formation of a positive image of Russia in African countries and vice versa. And thirdly, to strengthen relations between Russia and African countries. In terms of our activities, we organize roundtables and interactive lectures and cultural events. We also have networks. I will send links to them in the chat. And we will be glad to see you all at our events. Thank you very much for participating in our discussion.
I had a pleasure to talking with Alexei, and he told me that the main platform of you is VK, which is not like that common in the rest of the world. Basically, like in my country, it's not, I cannot access it actually. So I would recommend you to go maybe also with Facebook or something.
Yes, of course. We have Instagram and we have a Facebook page and we update them.
Yeah,
Yes, but
yes, we'll send links to them.
Yes, I have already sent. But VK is the most common platform in Russia, and about 90% of the members and of the participants of our events and the members of our club are Russians, so it's the most convenient way to convey the information about our events. So we use VK and Facebook and Instagram too. Yes.
Yes.
So for your recommendation,
information in the whole networks.
So that's it for us today. Thanks to every participant. I think we are done as of today. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Thank you for the moderation of our discussion. I think it was perfect. Thank you.
So, ну что, пора расходиться?
Да, пора.
Иван, а вы в какой стране живете, если не секрет, где нет ВКонтакте? Это что за страна такая замечательная? У вас выключен микрофон, мы вообще ничего не слышим, что вы говорите.
Да, всем привет из Киева.
И там, смотрите, очень просто.